Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. I'd like to welcome you to the 77th episode of the Servoy Tech Series. Today we will be joined by a Servoy customer who's going to talk about an interesting approach they've taken to deploying their applications as mobile applications using a progressive web apps convention. But before we jump into that, I'd like to remind you a few housekeeping notes. Number one, this session is recorded and the recordings are available on our archives on our site. And also number two, there is a questions panel in your Zoom console there. So at any point during the webinar, if you have a question, please type it in. And at the end, we will allocate some time for question and answer. So today I'm excited because typically I'm doing these webinars by myself and it's a lot of work and a bit of a juggling act. And anytime I can have some help, but also have someone to talk to in these webinars, it makes it a lot more interactive and fun. So I am happy to welcome the guys from Portfolio Plus. They're a fintech software vendor based out of Toronto, Canada. And they've been working with Servoy for a number of years, building applications for banks and credit unions. But why don't I introduce Ian and Paolo. Hi, guys. Let you guys explain who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name's Ian, and I work at Portfolio Plus, and we create banking solutions for credit unions and banks. And today we're going to talk about one of our products, which is the online banking solution. So not only do we provide the core solution, but that banks run on internally, but also the online banking that their customers use.
Cool. Yes, the reason we decided to do this webinar is that Ian had actually mailed me about some questions about kind of some custom integrations in Servoy's NG client, and I started asking him, well, why are you asking me these questions? And he pointed me to some literature he had been reading about progressive web apps, and we decided to do a call together, and then he showed me what he had made, and I was really impressed, and I got our mobile expert on the call as well, and he was also impressed. And the two of them got together and started working on a solution, and we decided that this is useful for everyone. So today, as is the tradition in the Tech Webinar series, we're going to start with a couple of demos, and then we'll do some slides to capture the overview. So first, Ian and Paolo are going to show a bit of a case study on Portfolio's Plus Banking product, and sort of why they chose to distribute it as PWA and how it works. And then I'll do a short demo of a open source project that is available through Servoy's repositories called the isPWA mobile project, which demonstrates a lot of capabilities for delivering mobile features in the Servoy platform. And we've updated that to show kind of a reference approach for doing the PWA distribution. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if I can figure out how to do that, there we go. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, Ian, to go ahead and show your application.
Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my screen now. And
yes.
What's open in front of you is the login page for our Servoy application. It's NG client built in Servoy, and this is how our customers would log into their online banking. So what we've added is the progressive web app functionality to this, so that when clients load this page up, whether they be on a mobile device, a Mac or a PC, there's an additional little button for them to install the progressive web app. And when they click on it, and we may enhance this further by actually having an on-screen button, because it's very unobvious in some of the browsers that you can install it. But when you click on it, it prompts you to install the app. And when you install it, it goes and grabs a copy of all the JavaScript and CSS for that site and stores it locally and puts an icon on the desktop of, well, or the home screen of the device. And you can see that it loaded the page without any address bar, and it's looks very much like a native app, but it's a progressive web app. So the nice thing about this is whenever they launch from the icon, it's going to run a service worker that goes to the web server and makes sure that it has the most recent version of the JavaScript and the CSS, and it's going to then load the page up using the most recent versions if it didn't already have a copy of them. And users like on a mobile device can uninstall it by, you know, the normal uninstall methods for that device. So in Windows, you can go to your control panel and your programs and features and uninstall it. On other devices, it's the same as any other app. Or you can, there's a ellipsis here that you can click and you can uninstall it. And then the icon disappears. So that's the functional demo. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if anybody has a hand up.
I actually have a question, Ian.
Sure.
You had said that, well, there's the little plus button up in the address bar to do the install. And you had said that you consider doing like an in-app button or a custom button. Is that a possibility where they could land on your site or your page, and you could present them something actually in the page that prompts them to install it as a PWA?
Yes, that's an option. We're looking into that. We haven't actually tested it on iOS to see if it's supported yet, but it's certainly a feature that we'd be interested in to make it more obvious to clients that they could install to their home screen.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and so I can also do a short demo and talk a bit about the SVY mobile project, where this you can find more info about how to do this. In my browser here, I've gone to svymobile.servoy.com. Anyone can go here, and the page loads in a browser. It's also a mobile-friendly site. I will bring up my inspector tools and show this kind of as it would be in a phone. Now, if you're running, depending on your platform, like iOS, you might be running this in Safari. There's a little button at the bottom where you can add, click it and add to home screen. But since I'm demoing this from a kind of an emulation, it's still the Chrome browser, so it's the same step that Ian took, and then you can click that and install it to your desktop. And then it runs it standalone here, so you can see that it's actually got its own window with its own icon, and it pulls all of that from the configurations that we'll get into in a minute. Something else I want to point out here is that if you go in the inspector here to the network tab and go to the online and set it to offline. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. I get a custom offline screen. So this application doesn't have any offline functionality. But typically, if you were offline, you wouldn't get a friendly notification. So what's happened here is that we've configured an offline page, and that gets cached when the application loads, and it's that service worker that Ian had mentioned, which when the application loads, first before it starts looking for resources in the on the web server, it runs the service worker, and it checks to see if there's internet connection. If there's not internet connection, it instead displays this offline page. So that's just one example of ways that you can kind of optimize the experience. There's a lot you could probably do with service workers, and it's subjective how much content or how much functionality you should put offline here. But it's a nice bridge from having something which only runs in a browser and can't do anything offline and is kind of user unfriendly in that situation, versus having something which is completely deployed as a native application. And this kind of is a quick way to bridge that functionality. I'm going to put this back online and reload it. So I think what's worth showing is kind of how this project gets set up. This isPWA mobile project is, again, kind of a reference project for examples of how you can do things in a mobile application, how you can take advantage of some native integrations. But we did add the PWA approach, and I want to show kind of quickly how we did that. If you go to the isPWA mobile project on our GitHub space, and you go into the isPWA mobile folder, which is the main application, the main solution. In every Servoy application, there's a media folder where you can put really any file, some static content, etc. But there is a internet specification called the WebApp manifest. And there's a convention here where if you put manifest.json file in your media folder of your application, and you fill in some of the fields that are a part of that spec, then I think as a bare minimum, if you kind of put in the main part of this, including that the display is standalone and the start URL, then that already will prompt most browsers to handle that application and provide that little button that you saw in Ian's demo. So it's really that manifest.json file which exposes this as an installable PWA to the system. Now, of course, there's the different icons too, like the desktop icon and the window icon. So you can configure some of those, and there's probably better documentation on that specification on the internet. But it's really about just sticking this one file in the media folder. Also in the media folder, in the example I showed, where you get that offline page, you do have to prompt it to load the service worker. So there is a file here to load the service worker, which tells it to basically to register it. Then I'm going to jump out to another folder in this project, but basically when you bundle your web application or your WAR file, if you put out whatever content you want out on the root of the web app, then it's available, and here's the actual service worker that goes and looks for if the application's offline and if it's not online, then it loads this offline HTML page, and this is the one that said, sorry, this one here that we saw. So what that service worker does could be anything. So I want to emphasize that what we showed is like a really simple example. But it's sort of the idea that your Servoy NG client web application can start to do things offline, can cache things, can optimize performance. I think, Ian, you guys took this approach to also optimize some loading, right? So that once you install it the first time, you're caching some resources, and then when you double click that icon on your desktop, it loads much faster. Is that right?
Yeah, so we got a quite a large performance boost because we do have some very large resources and some images that that loaded much faster because they were cached.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, and you could put different content out here on the static content on in your web app and use the service worker. And I don't want to get into the service worker itself. It's a bit too technical for this webinar. But there's plenty of resources on the internet on how to write service workers to do things. It's really just like a kind of a service workers can't access the DOM or the web page or anything, but what they can do is they can check to see if you have internet connection and do things like load the offline HTML page here.
Yeah, and if people want to look at PWAbuilder.com has some wonderful resources on service workers and have several samples that are ready to copy and paste and use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll add that to the list of links in the slides for this when we share it. Okay. So maybe just a quick overview of what PWAs are. I mean, it stands for Progressive Web Apps, but what they really are just regular web applications. They're not different. And as you guys who are already using Servoy know, Servoy's NG client is just a pure web application, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, nothing else. But they do provide that native-like sort of capability and experience. So it gives the user the impression that they're using an application, and it sort of gives you that installable feel. So there is the ability to install it on an iPhone, add to home screen, on a desktop, you add to the desktop, and then when you run it, you get that standalone window. You can launch it from a taskbar or the desktop or the dock. It shows up in your search if you're just switching between apps on your phone. It's all you get that native feel, and you don't have that feeling like you're just using a browser. It also can increase your distribution channel, and I think this was another reason that Portfolio Plus went for this approach. So maybe Ian, can you talk a bit about after you guys had built your Plus banking application and then you're distributing it to customers, can you talk a bit about their different app store strategies and how you adapted to that?
Yes. So some of our customers are medium size and some of them are quite small. And so when we were deploying mobile apps for them and they were managing their app stores, they found it quite time consuming to manage test flight and manage, allow their internal users to test it and promote it through all the different levels of each app stores. So we were getting a little bit of pushback on that, and we were ending up having to do a little bit of hand-holding to help them manage this. And that was really just our small clients that, they really only have 2 IT people to manage all this. And so we saw Progressive Web Apps as a way that a small company could could easily manage this and still give their clients a mobile app that is installable from the browser. And when we dug a little bit further, we also realized, okay, well, now we've got that app. Now we can take that same progressive web app and compile it and promote it through the store for the clients that want to use it. So we wouldn't have a fragmented approach to our mobile solution. Fragmented meaning, we compile it for the stores one way, as opposed, and we do the PWA as a side off. It would be the same app, whether they went through the store or through the web.
I guess it's also worth pointing out that because you guys deliver, excuse me, applications to financial institutions, these typically run on premise and on premise of the institution, and they want all the labeling and branding to be their own. So it has to go through their store, right? Not the Portfolio Plus store. Is that right? Yes,
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And how does that work? Where because I know that putting an application in the stores requires certification, and it can be a bit of a hassle. Does that change at all with once you have a PWA? Is it pretty much the same process?
It's pretty much the same process.
Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you've still got, at the end of the day, you're uploading from Xcode to the App Store, or you're uploading to the Play Store and going through the same steps. So there really isn't a difference. If you're going to put it in the store, you've still got to go through the same steps. But you've got also the ability to put it in the Microsoft Store if you wanted.
Okay. Another use case is there are some drawbacks to fully native applications. So I know I should point out for people that might be new to Servoy's mobile strategy that there's another way to offer your applications, which is with a more like a hybrid approach, where there really is binaries on the device, and but there are barriers to that. For one, there's the native installation, so your users do have to go to a store and download a binary. There's more storage required. I find the next point kind of compelling, because for me, I install an app that I end up using really occasionally, but there's no other way to do it, or you go to some crappy mobile website instead. So I think for use cases where you're installing something that's only going to be used occasionally, just having that that lightweight PWA is compelling, and it reduces that that friction of if you're on someone's site and then you have to go to the App Store and go download, versus you just sort of almost bookmark it or add it to your home screen. We did mention the optimization of performance, and I think that there were two components to that. One is caching data for faster startup, which Portfolio was able to get a big performance increase with that approach. And the other one I demonstrated, which is how you can have that sort of offline first mobile application, even though you really have a web application. At least it has some minimal functionality when it's offline, and you can access the local cache while it's offline, so you can get creative with that. At a bare minimum, you can have a sorry screen like I showed, but you might be able to include a little bit of functionality or content at least when your application's offline, and that uses the service worker technology. In sort of the perspective of or the spectrum of application delivery, the PWAs kind of fit in the middle next to the hybrid approach. With Servoy's technology suite, we offer kind of the right three here. Out of the box, the Servoy NG client is a standards-based web application. And for several years, the NG mobile project has allowed our customers to deliver the applications in a hybrid fashion. So that's really providing the native access to the device through through like Cordova plugins, but it's still running in like a web engine on the device. So there's nothing really native going on there. It's just through the plugins that get that native connectivity. And that has a lot of advantages. For one, every time you update your application, you don't need to redistribute a binary. It's always up to date, because you're just pushing to a web server. And so that's been on offer for a number of years. And the PWA approach kind of sits in between those two, I think, in terms of the spectrum. If you really need totally native control, then you really have to do things yourself, in some of the lower level languages. I should also, I'll skip that one for now. I think it's worth pointing out some considerations, that this is not a panacea. It's not a replacement for the hybrid approach. And so for one, the user experience is not fully consistent across browsers. So you have, of course, the difference between like a desktop and a phone, but you also have the difference across the browsers themselves. And I do believe there's what you can do in terms of native integrations varies across platforms as well. And there's probably not support there for more advanced device integrations like biometrics. But maybe Ian, can you comment on this point? We didn't talk about native integrations because neither of our examples showed any integration with the device. Can you talk about some of the integrations you guys are looking at and what's available and what's not?
Yes. So with the PWA, you're really still running a web view inside of an app. It's the web view of whatever browser you use to install it with. So you're really, the functionality or the integrations that you have with devices are really exactly the same as any browser. So if that helps clarify it, rather than going through a list of what you can do and can't do, I mean, for us on our roadmap is we want to enable integration with Face ID and fingerprint logins on Android. So they do have, both of those things have APIs that support them. We can't force biometrics from the web. Obviously, it's not like a native app where we can make direct calls to the biometrics. So it's certainly on our roadmap, and it's a challenge that that we're going to have when we come to implement that.
Okay. Yeah. So it's, I guess if you're picking a strategy today, it's something to consider is what native integrations do you need today, and which ones do you foresee that you will need? Because there could be some hard limitations, depending on what you need.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Just a quick overview of how it works, because we didn't usually in these webinars we get under the hood a bit and we look at code. It's largely because there's not a lot of code needed, but at a bare minimum you got to include that manifest JSON file, And if you put that in the media folder of your solution, it sort of exposes your, a description of your application to the browser, and then if it sees the right tags, then it can expose that to be installed. And you can also include some of the icons there, like you saw the Portfolio Plus icon on Ian's desktop, to be able to brand it and et cetera. The other thing that's needed is if you want to get into offline functionality and caching, you should implement the service workers. And there is, I didn't get too much into it, but there is on that isPWA mobile site, there's a bit of a wiki entry on this, and with some links to some documentations. And Ian mentioned the PWA builder, right? Is the site that has some good examples there.
Yeah, PWAbuilder.com, and they have several different types of service workers, examples for allowing the website to run completely offline with full functionality, if that's if you have static websites. But then the more common service workers do some network first caching.
Mm-hmm. I put offline HTML here. That's not a convention or a standard or anything, but I just sort of put that because that's the one that the page that I showed, and that was just some content that was out on the root web app folder that the service worker loaded. There is one other thing I didn't show, which is head index contributions. If you put this file, head index contributions.html, in your media folder, Servoy will inject it into the head part of the page, the index page, and so that's a way to load some things. And for example, if you want to, I didn't show this, but if you wanted to make sure this works on iOS, for example, I believe if I go back to the medias folder, you can see it right here, and there's some tags that it injects for you there. There's also the ngutils plugin, which probably goes in. Let me check the globals here. I also didn't show that. Yeah. I guess it's not in the on-solution open here. I think the ngutils plugin, and you can also inject things down into the page as well. I think it's right here, add service worker. Right there. So contributed tags, so you can push those down like as the application's loading. So there's some documentation on the isPWA mobile site there. But what you do with it is really up to you. Okay, I think that's all we have. Encourage you guys to check out the isPWA mobile for examples of that, and we're ready for questions and answers. So let me bring this up. Okay. So we had one question, which was, are you able to use service workers caching features? And I think we answered that. That's one of the main use cases. Another question, is it possible to store offline data containing media, pictures, etc.? The answer to that is yes. So I don't see any other questions for this. I have one question for the portfolio guys. What are you planning to do next with your application? What's on the horizon?
Specifically in regard
related to this topic, yeah.
To progressive web apps, well, we did talk briefly about providing a more consistent user experience when installing it. So currently, the icons in each browser to, the plus sign that you have to click on, are unobvious and inconsistent across the browsers. So we're looking at providing a button on the login screen that prompts the user to install it that's consistent across all the devices.
Nice.
And then further down the road, of course, there'll be our biometrics that we want to implement, but that's probably 18 months out before we start that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then are you researching if that's compatible with your approach, or you already have proven that?
No, we need to research some more to see if that's going to be fully compatible.
Okay. All right. Well, we're already over the time limit, and I want to thank Ian and Paolo for not only for participating in this webinar, but also for bringing this topic to our attention. I know that there's those of you out there that are already deploying NG mobile hybrid applications, and this is perhaps interesting to you, and also those who are believing that delivering a mobile application is going to be something which is tricky. I think Ian just showed that it doesn't have to be that tricky at all. So I want to thank you guys a lot for this, and we'll post the recording. So everyone, have a good day, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks.